up as we welcome in the Sacramento Kings beat writer for the
Mm.
Sacramento Bee, our man Chris Biderman, of course. We'll talk Kings basketball with Chris as the conversation rolls along, but we got to start, host the Candlestick Chronicles as well. We got to start with the San Francisco 49ers win last night, Chris. And I told you when I text you, man, I'm starting to believe in both of these teams. And Kenny and I have been talking about this all morning or all afternoon. Man, I think this 49ers team is the best in the NFC.
Yeah, I would agree with that, particularly given the fact that the rest of the NFC just doesn't seem all that strong. And that's not to try to diminish what the 49ers are doing right now. But for me, the Cardinals game sort of, and I know it was the Cardinals and Colt McCoy and all of that, but to me, the 49ers sort of graduated from hypothetical contender to actual contender, right? Because I think the theme from the first half of the season was, well, we know this team's good. We know this team has playoff runs in their history, but we haven't really seen them put together performances that say they're a contender this season. And the last three games with the win over the Chargers and the Rams before the bye, and then last night against Arizona, you're starting to see signs of like, okay, they're starting to hit their stride. They're starting to get going a little bit. And just the numbers, like, you know, our mutual friend Nick Wagner tweeted out these numbers last night, which kind of blew my mind. Like, Jimmy Garoppolo with Christian McCaffrey on the field is completing 79% of his throws, 9.2 yards per attempt, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions. Without McCaffrey, he's completing 62% of his throws, so 17% fewer, 7.6 yards per attempt, like a yard and a half fewer, 8 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. Right. So, well, Christian McCaffrey has unlocked this version of Jimmy Garoppolo that we haven't seen all season. And it's really allowing the offense to flourish. And then the defense is doing its thing, having, you know, pitch shutouts in the second half of the last 3 games. So they feel like a complete team right now. And I do think it's fair to, like, now it feels like we have actual tangible proof that this season the 49ers are NFC contenders, rather than just sort of relying on what they did in 2019 and 2021 to make that claim.
And one of the things about that, Chris, and you mentioned it a little bit, is the play of Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy's been pretty good. I'm not trying to make it or Lamar or nothing like that, but he's been pretty good. And you read those numbers with Christian McCaffrey on the field and off. But even take it a step further, and I think it was starting with the day McCaffrey got there. You know, they played the Chiefs game, they lost or whatever the case may be. But even including that game, he's like 8 touchdowns and 1 interception in those 4 or 5 games since McCaffrey got here. And he seems to be getting better, more comfortable with McCaffrey out there and being able to work the ball around to all those weapons. Jimmy's playing some really good football right now.
It's the first time in his career he's gone 3 straight starts without throwing an interception.
Wow.
And I think you can trace that directly to what Christian McCaffrey offers them in the passing game, right? Because you saw it even last night, and I know we had talked about it after they made that trade. Like, the real value for Christian McCaffrey to the 49ers is in the passing game. And he's been, you know, he had 7 catches last night. He did a little bit of everything out against the Rams. Against the Chargers, it wasn't such a big game for him, but like, having Christian McCaffrey as a check down option has seemingly alleviated Jimmy Garoppolo's stress late in the down, where you typically see him make bad throws and try to force passes to guys over the middle of the field like Deebo Samuel and whatnot that turn in interceptions. And now Jimmy's like, oh, I got Christian McCaffrey, and as a check down option, as, you know, my 3rd or 4th read, if he's not a primary read. And then it's like, yeah, let's just take this 6 yards. Right. And when you can get those 6 yards seemingly whenever you want, instead of throwing possible, you know, interceptions, it's a huge game changer for what the 49ers can do from an efficiency standpoint. And one of the interesting things from last night too was that, you know, we typically talk about the 49ers as a team that needs to run the ball like 35, 40 times to be effective. In the first half last night, they threw the ball 21 times and had just 7 rushing attempts. Like, it was kind of the opposite. And they're utilizing Christian McCaffrey in the slot a little bit more. And you're starting to see the quick passing game sort of replace the running game. And when you can do that, when you don't have to be so reliant on the running game, I think the offense just balances out overall. And that's when you get Kyle Shanahan being a little bit more creative and a little bit more aggressive in the way he game plans and the way he calls these games.
Chris, you said something on your recap on Candlestick Chronicles last night that caused me to hit the back 15 seconds button and make sure that I heard it correctly.
Uh-oh.
Where do you think Jimmy G is playing next year?
Man, would it be surprising if they brought him back to you?
Yeah.
It would?
Yeah, it would. Well, you drafted a quarterback you traded to draft a quarterback at, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, but very high.
Yeah. So look, I think you guys know, like, I'm as optimistic on Trey Lance really as anybody. And I throw out what happened in week 1 against Chicago because of all the extenuating circumstances. And even what he did last year as a rookie, like, we remember how poorly Justin Fields played during certain stretches of last season and even this season. And it takes a lot of time for these guys to develop. So I think it's far too soon to, stick the nail in Trey Lance's coffin in terms of being a successful NFL quarterback. But if you're the 49ers and you're looking at the way this team is playing right now, and obviously there's still a whole lot of season left, and we'll learn a lot more about perhaps the way they feel about Jimmy Garoppolo in the playoffs. But like, and I know people are going to talk about the salary cap stuff. Look, Jimmy Garoppolo's agent, Don Yee, for years and years, reworked Tom Brady's contract with the New England Patriots in order to make it a palatable number from a salary cap standpoint in order to build a championship type roster around Tom Brady. And Jimmy Garoppolo, I've covered him ever since he got to the 49ers. He's never felt like a guy to me. And this was even evident in, the whole offseason leading up to this year when he decided to come back, saying things like, you have to know your place in this league. And I'm really a team guy. And he honestly, I get the feeling from Jimmy, like, it's not a platitude and it's not necessarily a cliche. Like, he wants to win and he wants to be where he's comfortable. And like, if he's just evaluating his options in the offseason, could he get $30 million from, I don't know, like the Colts? And would he want to go there and deal with all of that? Or would he want to take 20 and come back and have Christian McCaffrey, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle at his disposal in an offense he doesn't have to learn, right? Like, he already knows it. So just looking at the dynamic and sort of how these sides have acted, it wouldn't surprise me at all if they bring Jimmy back, because the feeling I get as Kyle Shanahan's coaching career goes on and on, I think he's going to have less and less patience while this roster is in its quote unquote championship window to try to develop a young quarterback. So, I've thought for a while that Tom Brady would be a serious option for the 49ers if he decided to play next year, because I just don't, the feeling I get, and this isn't reporting, this is just speculating on my part, but the feeling I get is they're not going to go into next season with Trey Lance as their only option. I think they're open and might realize that they want to have another possible starting option. And if Jimmy Garoppolo is going to play like this, it makes sense for both sides to bring him back if they can make the money work. And it would be complicated for sure, but I don't think it's just an open and shut case that Jimmy's out next year. I do think there's a very real possibility that he's back with the 49ers in 2023.
That would be a bombshell. That would be a bombshell. And the other thing about that is, this is the way that I've looked at it, right? If they can't win a Super Bowl this year, that's kind of more confirmation of what you felt coming into last year or at the end of last year, and what you felt going into that draft, is that it's not that Jimmy is a bad quarterback, but there's an element to his game that can't get you over the hump. And that's what you're looking for in Trey Lance. And then the other side of it, this is kind of just fan can you care away, I guess, is if they did win a Super Bowl, thank you. Job's done. It's completed. You gave me the 6th Super Bowl that I've been looking for the last 20 years. You can go on and get $140 million somewhere, and we'll try and develop the kid. The pressure is off. We won the Super Bowl. Now, I know NFL teams don't think like that. They may say, hey, we won a Super Bowl with them. Let's try and win another one with them. But that's why I find in both situations, win or lose, like, man, I see him moving on both ways.
Yeah, I mean, look, who knows what's going to happen the rest of the way. I think one of the things, I mean, I've alluded to it with the stats and just the way the offenses looked with Christian McCaffrey. It's almost like Christian McCaffrey being used this way is like tailor-made to help Jimmy Garoppolo, just with the check down options, with the fact that he can be available on short passes and keep the chains moving. Like that almost feels like an antidote for the issues that Jimmy Garoppolo had. And you're starting to see Jimmy Garoppolo make plays outside the structure of the offense, which had always been a weak point of his. Like the second reaction plays when his first or second read isn't there, when he has to when he has to operate on the fly, he's been a lot better. You saw it with that Ray McLeod throw against the Chargers, and you saw it with the George Kittle touchdown pass last night against Arizona. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, okay, so Jimmy Garoppolo is starting to make plays outside the structure of the offense again, which we hadn't really seen, frankly, since 2017 before his knee injury. Like that mobility and that ability to just kind of throw on the run has been kind of gone since he tore his ACL early in 2018. And the fact that this is coming back and you see how Christian McCaffrey is being used, it just seems like, man, maybe they can win with Jimmy Garoppolo. Like, with Christian McCaffrey and the offense operating in this form, to me, I feel more confident that the 49ers could be better in those fourth quarter situations in big games because they do have a chain mover in Christian McCaffrey, which is a big element that they didn't have in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs and in the NFC Championship game against the Rams in particular.
You're listening to D'Lo and KC on KIFM West Sacramento 98.5 FM, KRXQ HD2 Sacramento, ESPN 1320, driven by Lasher's Elk Grove Dodge, always live on the free Odyssey app, live on Twitch and YouTube as well, youtube.com/ESPN 1320. If you're watching, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe buttons as well. If you want to catch up on the show, YouTube is a great spot to do it, as is the Odyssey app. This version that we saw last night of Jimmy Garoppolo, you talked about Nick Wagner. Nick was 49ers Stats Inc. last night, just tweeting stat after stat, and a lot of them surrounded Jimmy Garoppolo, and the one about in the last 14 starts without an interception, 14-0. Like, I mean, the numbers. It feels like the version that we saw of Jimmy Garoppolo last night is the difference. And maybe this is what you were talking about at the start of this conversation. It's the difference between this is a good team. It's a playoff team. It's a contender. And no, this is a Super Bowl contender.
Yeah.
Like a real Super Bowl contender.
If he's not turning the ball over, it just completely changes everything. Right. Mm-hmm. Because that has always been the thing with Jimmy is that, yeah, he can be efficient and, you can run an offense effectively, but really what's killed the 49ers have been turnovers. And it's just, they're a handful of plays a game where it's like, oh, bad Jimmy, like bad throw. The Tennessee game last year, he had a bad interception. The game at Seattle last year, he had a bad interception. He struggled in the early half of the season when they started 3-5, right? The 49ers in the playoffs basically won in spite of their quarterback play in Dallas and in Green Bay. Like I think we can look at it objectively and say that's a fact. Like they won despite Jimmy Garoppolo. But the way Jimmy Garoppolo is playing now with how efficient he is, on top of the fact he's not turning the ball over, on top of the fact he's making plays on the move and somewhat outside the structure of the offense, to me, it just looks completely different. And so I do think, again, Christian McCaffrey being able to get, 6 yards on check down plays basically whenever you want is just a huge game changer because it just alleviates Jimmy Garoppolo from having to be in a lot of those situations that lead to those mistakes. And I think we're seeing it in the efficiency now, and it opens up everything for everybody else because Kyle Shanahan can spread the ball out a little bit more. Like it doesn't feel like, one issue I've had with Kyle Shanahan in terms of his offensive philosophy or play calling or whatever you want to call it is like, it feels like one guy is a focus of the passing game each week in any given game plan. But now, like, you're starting to spread it out a little bit more because you do have more options and you do have that outlet, that release valve in Christian McCaffrey. And I just think it gives the 49ers a completely different dynamic offensively in the passing game.
Yeah, I agree. Chris, I'm like, we like to plan ahead, and, I want to make sure, my life is in order and everything's good. And I was just planning ahead. And I was like, I got a busy, 5-6 months or so because I guess I got a couple of parades I need to go to. I'm going to the Niners Super Bowl parade, and it looks like I'm going to be on a float somewhere here in downtown Sacramento on J Street somewhere, because the Kings, they're not losing no more. And me and the guy that bet $25,000 on them to win the NBA championship, we're going to be somewhere on J Street just taking shots after the Kings win the NBA Finals. That sounds about right?
And can we acknowledge the Chris Biderman effect? Was this happening before Chris Biderman was named the Sacramento Kings beat writer?
It wasn't.
Right. Like so the Kings haven't lost a game since we've kind of reshuffled our sports department.
There it is.
Oh,
come on, man.
Subscribe to the
Biderman
B
effect.
if you don't. Like if you're really superstitious, I think the B deserves all the credit for this.
Hey, I just want to thank Chris Biderman.
Come on, man. Come on, man.
No, they're good. Like the thing is with sports, and like when you cover teams as you're close and you're there every day, it's super easy to read into players' quotes and everybody talking about how happy they are and how everybody's bought in. And I've been, I covered the 49ers for a long time. 2016 guys were saying, oh yeah, we're bought in, but it was a 2-14 football team, right? Like, but with the Kings and hearing about the way they talk about each other and the relationships they have and the culture that Mike Brown is building, it does feel real, right? Like there was a story I did about Domantas Sabonis. I'm sure you guys have talked about it and it's been talked about elsewhere, but like not my story, but just the fact that like he invited everybody to his house in Napa in June and they all went out to dinner and all worked out together and got to know each other and watched the finals and did all that. And there were similar things happening in Vegas during Summer League when all this stuff, they're voluntarily working out with each other and learning each other. The buy-in with this team is real. And like, you can talk to guys on and off the record to a man, like they believe in what Mike Brown is selling. And Mike Brown has a ton of credibility to that roster because of what he's experienced, because he's been on championship staffs, because he's coached LeBron James, because he's coached Kobe Bryant. So, and they understand that they need to improve defensively and they're taking strides there. But I mean, you look at the roster too, it's like, what's the most important thing to have in the NBA right now? It's like two-way wings or two-way players who can hit threes. The Kings always have 4 shooters on the floor at all times. And even Domas is shooting, 31% from 3. It's obviously a small sample, but like they always have 4 shooters on the floor. Their spacing is great. They've really bought into pacing. The ball flies around the floor. They're always looking for open guys. And they have guys who can hit shots. And it's a lot of fun to watch. I think they're tangibly having fun playing basketball together. And I think that's a really valuable thing for, frankly, and you guys know this as well as anybody else, that like the Kings haven't always been that team where people are having fun playing basketball. And so now people are buying in and you're seeing the fruits of that come through in the win column. And they're, like I said, they're a lot of fun to watch. They still have areas to improve, particularly defensively, but like, man, if they're going to score 120 a night, they might not have to be a top 10 defense to be an actual playoff team. Like they might just be able to be in that 15 range and could be at like a top 6 seed out of the play-in tournament. I really believe that.
But that's the problem, though. That's my only like pause on all of this is we 100% agree with you. 15, 16, 17, 18, some with a teen in it, I'll take. Problem is they're 27th.
Right.
And that's just where I keep getting stuck. It's like, all right, they're 27th. They've shown signs defensively. Most importantly, they've shown signs defensively in the most critical moments of games, which have resulted in W's. Obviously, you want that. But we all know, we talk about this every year, the season shifts. Games that we're seeing right now in November are going to look very, very different when we get to March or even February. And then, if you are fortunate enough to get a playing spot, playoff spot, it's an entirely different type of basketball game.
One thing I will say, and this probably has to do with the Kings defense too, but like teams through 15 games this year shooting 39% from 3 against them. That's a really, really high number, right? That's 29th in the league. If that normalizes a little bit, then you might see the defensive numbers improve. Like if they get, instead of 39% from opponents beyond the arc, if they get to like 36%, you might see that number dip pretty drastically. Like Detroit the other night, they didn't defend well at all against Detroit. I don't want to say they did, but like Detroit's not a good 3-point shooting team, and Detroit shot 52% or whatever it was in that game. Like if over a long haul, if they can defend the 3-point line better, maybe get a little bit better luck in terms of the way opponents are shooting from three, then I think the defense will be really good. And look, not really good, but better. One of the best signs I think for them right now defensively, their defensive rebound rate is best in the league. They're pulling in defensive rebounds on 75.4% of available misses, which is, that's better than the Bucks. It's better than Nuggets. It's better than Cleveland. Like those are real contenders who are good defensive teams. So there is like, that's positive, right? And like, I think the offense is for real. I don't think there's much that's like unsustainable about what they're doing offensively. Like Kevin Huerter is probably going to shoot closer to like 40% than 50% from three. But like for the most part, I think what they're doing is sustainable. And I think if the opponent's shooting numbers normalize a little bit, and if they do play better defensively, I think we're going to start to see that defensive rating fall a little bit more.
Hey, Chris, big 3 road games starting tonight in Memphis. Ja Morant may or may not play, but there's no Desmond Bane. Then they go to Atlanta on a back-to-back. Then Friday after after Thanksgiving in Boston. Well, what you looking for in these 3 games, man? What do you think they come away with? I'll start. I say they're going to go 2-1 in these 3 games.
So you think they win both in the back-to-back, or you think they win in Boston?
I think they beat the Memphis. Don't look at me like that, Jesse peeking over there like Kobe. I think they win the Memphis one.
Okay.
And I'm not sure yet whether or not they win Atlanta or Boston. I'm not sure.
Kevin Huerter revenge game.
Yeah, he was saying in the locker room the other night he wished it was the first game of the back-to-back, not the second. So he would have more time to sort of absorb that. But yeah, I mean, I think what probably the biggest question is, does the energy translate on the road? Like they just play with so much energy and so much pace offensively. Like, can they maintain that on the second night of a back-to-back? Are they going to be cutting as hard? Are they going to be are they going to be screening as hard? Are they going to be pushing the pace like they do at home? And I mean, winning on the road in the NBA is an entirely different animal. And so this is going to be a really good test for them. And it is kind of a hellacious week that, they have 3 games in 4 nights surrounding Thanksgiving on the East Coast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, to me, like even just win one of these games. Like if I'm trying to be optimistic about it, like just win one of these games and just have confidence, build confidence that you can maintain this level of energy on the road, I think is going to be the most important thing, because these are good litmus tests. Like Atlanta a couple years ago was in the Eastern Conference Finals, and we know Memphis thought they could have beaten the Warriors in the playoffs last year. We'll see with Ja Morant, but like the Memphis is a really good defensive team, particularly at home. So it's going to be a really good test for them. And I know they don't have Desmond Bane, but it's just whether or not the energy and the flow and just the speed they play with travels, I think is the most important thing I'm going to take away from this road trip for them.
Yeah. Chris, we appreciate you. And as we determined, you are the reason that the Kings are winning.
Thank you, Nani, and thank you, Chris Biderman.
Yes,
no problem. Subscribe to the B. Help us out.
Thank you. We appreciate you, Chris, man. Thanks as always. We'll catch up again soon. Have a great holiday.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for having me, guys. Best.